everybody, and welcome, and thank you all for coming tonight. We're delighted that you're here. I'm Carol Walensky. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Adult Education Committee, and we are sponsoring the Summer Limmud, but clearly it is our clergy who are doing all the work. And they are also very happy that you're here tonight. I want to welcome you. This is actually the start of the TRS 60th anniversary celebration. So this is the 60th anniversary Summer Limmud series. And the clergy selected the topic of choosing an ethical life as the broad umbrella for all 5 sessions. Last week, Rabbi Schwartzman spoke about obligations to honor your parents. And tonight, we're very fortunate that Rabbi Saxe is here to speak about the ethics of speech. In the coming weeks, Cantor Rose will talk about the joys and joys of raising children. That's next Thursday. On the 28th, our newest rabbi, who is actually here tonight in the back row, Alexandra Stein, will present on the ethics of systematic justice work. And our final presenter will be Cantor Shackett, who will speak about ethics in the workplace on August 4th. So we hope that you not only come tonight, but come as many times as you can over the 5 weeks of our series. It's wonderful to have you here in person. We're delighted that we're actually able to be in person. And just want you to know that I think you're okay with taking questions during the program? Or?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay. So Rabbi Saxe will give you a little bit of guidance about how he wants to proceed, but there definitely is time for discussion and questions, both during and after. And at the very end, out on, I assume it's going to be out here, Alan? On the Mishkan Terrace, we will have some light refreshments. So take it away.
Thank you very much, Carol. Thanks to the Adult Ed Committee. Thank you all for coming. As Carol just mentioned, this is about speech, right? So I don't want to be the only one speaking this evening, and I definitely would like for this to be a discussion. And you can see on this. In this packet, there are a lot of texts. We may not make it to all these texts, but I thought it was actually would be really fun for us to be able to take home what I feel like is, gets close to being, a list of the texts that speak about speech in Torah and mostly in rabbinic literature. So while we're speaking, though, let's just take a minute, just like we do at services, and make sure that we know the people who are immediately around us. I know there are some people in here who may not know very many people, who are new. So just, let's do that. Go. Okay, so I did split these texts that are in your packet up into some categories, but I also, I want to leave room for the fact that those are not the only ways in which speech affects us and affects our relationships. So at the risk of showing why I didn't become a teacher because of my handwriting, let's just get, would you just help me with some of the things, and I'll try to put them up here. What are the ways that speech affects us in our relationships? What are some of these ways? Larry. I'm sorry, Henry, did you say making us feel good? Great, okay. Larry?
Well, I was going to say,
Great. Great. Sam?
Certainly, first speech sets the nature of the relationship, I want to say image of yourself, or it establishes a nature of a relationship.
Nature of a relationship and image. I'll try to repeat because it's just of the recording too. Image and relationship. Is that what you said, Sam?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Something like that.
We don't need to wait for hands. Just speak because we don't want to take too much time with this.
The power of convincing somebody?
Aha, good. Persuasion. You see what I mean about my handwriting, right?
It's fine.
Thank you. Steve? I don't. It's this, or I think this is pink. So, reputation. Okay. Go ahead. Don't wait for hands.
Empathy.
And empathy. Great.
Next one. Disagreement.
Disagreement.
Labels.
Labels. Information. Connection.
Hurtful. Intimidation.
Wow. Intimidation. What was that feeling? Healing. Aha. Great. Maybe just a few more. I'm sorry? Hurt.
Yeah. Embarrassment. Connection.
Connection. I heard, and I don't think I wrote it. Love and anger. Sorry? All right. We'll see how we did later on. Herman.
Just a point of order. I don't know about the others, but I can hardly read.
I'm sorry. Right. My colors available are orange and pink. So I thought orange might be darker. So you want me to read these? I'll read them real quick. Reputation. Feel good or bad. Connect. Label. Information. Intimidation. Healing. Love. Anger. Embarrassment. Hurt. Disagreement. Empathy. Persuasion. The nature of your image and relationship. And I think that was all of them. So that's great. So that's some of what is on our minds. And now the markers arrive.
Just in case you're going to write some more.
Alan, if we could just move that board forward, it might be easier for people to see.
Great. So as I said, I collected texts for us to look at together and hopefully talk about together. I invite you to offer comments or ask questions, point things out as we go. I don't need for this to be, speak and then question and answer afterwards. I will ask a few different times for thoughts, but I still invite you to raise your hand. We do have a microphone because this is being recorded. It's not that it's being streamed, but it is being recorded. So we're going to try to capture everything that's being said. So the first few texts that I laid out here really just help us to underline the importance of speech in Judaism, in Torah, and really even more in Rabbinic Judaism. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. I think many of us have heard this one. It's a beautiful teaching, and not only how important speech is, but how deep the consequences can be in speech. And then still in this same text, number 1, God said, "Let there be light." Just the fact that the world was created according to Jewish tradition through speech is a beautiful way for Judaism to underline the importance of speech. One of my favorite prayers, unfortunately we don't include it in the Reform service very often, but it's a prayer of the morning service, Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam. One of the ways we praise God is we praised is the one who spoke and the world came into being. In the service in our in the tefillah section of our service, this second text is the beginning of the meditation, the one moment of silent prayer. After all the prescribed prayers, there's one moment of silent prayer, and there's one meditation that is offered to read in traditional services, and it begins with these words: "My God, guard my tongue from evil and my lips from speaking deceitfully. Elohai nitzor leshoni me'ra." And then this great story about Rabban Gamliel, who said to Tavi, his servant, "Go and get me good food from the market." The servant went and brought him tongue. Gamliel said to him, "Go and get me bad food from the market." He went and brought him tongue. Said Gamliel to him, "What is this? When I told you to get good food, you brought me tongue. When I told you to get bad food, you also brought me tongue." Tavi replied, of course, as we know, right? What's going to happen? Good comes from it and bad comes from it. When the tongue is good, there is nothing better. And when it is bad, there is nothing worse.
Except that there are some of us who believe tongue in any way is great.
And Sam is pointing out that tongue is, what'd you say, great or awful?
Great.
Is wonderful, is great no matter when you taste it, right? Okay.
You grew up in a family getting
I'm just going to try to repeat comments that if they're said without a microphone, but yes, okay, lovers of tongue in the crowd.
What's interesting to me about this particular passage is that it's the servant who's pointing it out to the rabbi, the comment that tongue is good and evil, and not the other way around.
Wonderful. Yes, that not only the speech of our esteemed leaders is important, but that we all have something important to say. Great. Thank you.
Number two. Oh, I do. Okay. I just remember the prayer. My God, guard my tongue from evil and my lips from speaking deceitfully. And isn't the sentence after that in the prayer something about, "and those who slander me may give no heed"?
That's right.
Which I find interesting. It's like, don't speak evil, but if somebody speaks evil of you, don't worry.
Absolutely, right. Help me not to speak evil or deceitfully. And if others do so against me, help protect me from that. Right. It's a beautiful prayer.
I'm familiar with it. It hadn't occurred to me, but what struck me is the idea that we're looking to God for this power. And it seems a little, I don't know, I want to say strange, but like a trivial thing to ask from God, so to speak. Not that, on the other hand, it says it has the power of death and life, but it's looking to God to help me speak in a particular way which feels, maybe what's getting me, highly anthropomorphic.
Yes, I would agree. That prayer to me feels like an expression of knowing of what is demanded of us, that we ask for God's guidance in doing what we know we are commanded to do. So to me, that when I say that, because that's a very meaningful prayer for me, I actually wrote a setting of that prayer, and I feel like it's an expression of how important it is to do that. Yeah, Elise?
I wouldn't have thought about this without what Sam said, but it seems to me that it's also one of those times where we're asking God for something very personal, and that strikes me not as something we do often in Judaism. It's more something I associate with the Christian faith. So that I found that really interesting. I don't know if I'm making the right connection there, but that's how that felt after what you said and what Sam said.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, many of the prayers of the tefillah, of that section of the service, do ask for things. We generally don't say most of them during the Shabbat service because you're not supposed to make petitionary prayers on Shabbat. So, but it's, heal those who are ill, provide for the community, etc. And then the one that's a meditation, I think it makes a lot of sense to, give me the wisdom to do right. Lisa, and then I want to point out a couple of other things before we go on to this next section.
I look at prayers like this as reflexive. By saying it, you are reminding yourself this is how you want to be. So you don't need God to make you this way. By saying it, you're saying, I will be this way. It's reflexive, and I think many of our prayers are that way.
Wonderful. And speaking of prayer, the 70 names for God, I think, is a great example of how important words are. You know, we have so many different ways that we refer to God, and it shows us the diversity and the scope of what speech can do for us. Can we move on to the next section here on gossip? We'll dive into some of the specifics. So these first few texts in the area of gossip are really, they show us the importance in Judaism of privacy, which I think is interesting. Sometimes we might think of a communal religion like Judaism to be less interested in privacy, more interested in everything, you know, being open about everything and all being together, you know. But it's interesting to me that there are some of these texts in rabbinic tradition and in Torah. So this first one, when you make a loan of any sort to your neighbors, you must not enter their house to seize their pledge. You must remain outside while a person to whom you made the loan brings their pledge out to you.
Why is that under gossip?
Okay.
And speech?
Why is that under gossip? I chose to put it there under gossip because, well, as I just said, these first few texts in gossip, I'm trying to highlight just the importance in Judaism of privacy, which I think is related to gossip. So I thought this text was interesting because there's a sense here of I think the primary goal of this commandment is to preserve dignity and prevent humiliation. When somebody who's in need takes a loan, that you should give them the respect to not go inside their house and violate their privacy in that way. Sorry, I shouldn't even be using that. I'm here. But I think it is, you know, even just the fact that this commandment is in the tradition reminds us that each person's private space is their space, and that you know, even in.
But Jeff, wouldn't you think it's more private if they quietly went in the house to repossess rather than standing out in public and the entire neighbors see that you didn't pay your bill?
I can see that point. I think you could perhaps argue that either way. Steve, on this text?
I suspect that if the person invites you in to save himself the humiliation, that this
that
would
might
not
be
apply.
different. Mm-hmm.
But it really is up to him, not you just barging in and grabbing it.
Yeah, that's how I picture it too, that it's preventing somebody from barging in to someone's home to collect a debt. And then this interesting text that I had not actually seen before I was researching for this class, that number 2 in gossip. No one shall open windows facing a jointly open courtyard. No one may place an entrance in a courtyard opposite the entrance of another window or opposite another's window. Interesting. And then just interesting to note that in Israeli law, that, you know, Israel doesn't have a constitution, so it's not exactly a constitutional law, but the closest thing the state of Israel gets to a constitution is the basic laws that it has. And this is a basic law in Israel, that every person is entitled to privacy and the confidentiality of information concerning his or her life. Now, I am not an expert in American law, but my sense is that there is not really a similar, you know, we've talked about that a lot recently, right? Of course, because of this abortion decision, that there is not actually a right to privacy explicitly stated in the Constitution, and it's interesting that we have that in Israel. Yes, Carol, could you help? Thank you.
I have to speak up on this because this is a pet peeve of mine.
Okay,
I have 2 comments.
correct me.
I have 2 comments. The reason why the vaccination rate in Israel was so high was because the Israelis convinced the population to allow their private information to be given to Moderna. I think it was Moderna. And I understand that. It was a communal decision that said, for the good of the people, we'll give up our private information so that they can compile statistics and all that, but they gave up their privacy. And that is a double-edged sword, in my opinion. And the other thing this makes me think of are the Hipaa laws. Everybody makes you sign those forms, but you go up to the reception desk in a doctor's office, and they shout out your name. They want to know your birthday. It's embarrassing. And today I had to make an appointment for a procedure. That was announced. There were 6 people in the room. So I think there's a lack of respect for privacy in our country.
That's really interesting, very interesting, because I think of America as a place where we prioritize privacy, right? That it's about the individual. But that's a very good point, and I think that's an important issue to think about in terms of gossip, just the awareness that any question you ask, who else is present? Mm-hmm.
Jeff, I would agree with you, except we prioritize our
own privacy.
We don't prioritize yours, or yours, right? That's exactly what is happening with the Roe decision.
Interesting. Right. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
This struck me also. These are rules, well, we call it privacy, but it's to remove the temptation for gossip. That is, if you don't know about what's going on in your neighbor's house, then you can't talk about it. So it acknowledges the propensity or the risk that if you see that you would chatter about it, so you don't. The proper thing is to avoid that risk and that temptation, which I think is a good idea. And we have it in other areas as well as don't show people.
Great.
Right.
Yeah. Any other thoughts just about privacy?
Yeah, I kind of see it just the opposite way, is when I don't know something about somebody, I'm really try to figure it out. I had a friend who wouldn't tell me her age. And I tried everything to figure out her age. Now, as soon as I found out, I forgot. I didn't care. But it was because it was kept secret.
So the human desire to know private information. Interesting. Larry has a comment here right on the other side of you.
Sorry to go again, but first of all, number 2, about opening the windows in the courtyard, that takes away a lot of fun.
Yeah, it doesn't mention a telescope, right?
Exactly. But here's my corollary to that. If the impulse to something is there's joy in sharing this information, it's not about yourself. Isn't that the simplest rule? Just don't do it. Because there's joy in saying, you won't believe what happened to so-and-so. It's not joy, like good joy, but there's something in our hearts that I got to share this. This will get that guy. Or I like this person, but here's something you don't know about that person.
Okay, great.
Isn't that a simple test?
Great, wonderful. Yeah, so you're starting to get into gossip, from privacy really into gossip, which is perfect, because I think that's what we should go ahead and do now with this text, this 4th text under gossip. These next 2 are, I feel, the 2 Torah sources that speak about gossip. The first is this commandment in Leviticus. You shall not go up and down as a talebearer among your people. This is probably the purest commandment that hits this subject. Lo telech rachil be'amecha. And it follows that by lo ta'amod al dam re'acha. Don't profit from or stand upon or near the blood of your neighbor as well. This word rachil, you shall not go up and down as a talebearer or go up and down rachil among your people, is an interesting word. The word rachil the root is trafficker or trader, merchant. And it's not completely clear what is meant exactly by this commandment. some of the rabbis believe that, actually some of the rabbis thought it didn't have anything to do really with gossip or this understanding of it, but that's just don't go around taking things lightly. Because you just go around like as a trader or a merchant. Don't take things lightly. Be more serious about your consequences on the world. But others believe that a merchant or a trader had private access to a lot of information, and so you're not supposed to go around like that and share that information freely. You need to keep it very close to you. And then this second story is the story of Miriam and Aaron. How many are familiar with the relationship of Miriam and Aaron talking about Moses, the relationship between that story and slander or gossip? So in the book of Numbers, while the Israelites are wandering in the wilderness, there is this incident where Miriam and Aaron, the two siblings of Moses, have a conversation with each other. It's not exactly clear what they said, but it just tells us that Miriam and Aaron spoke about Moses. And the only thing we know that they said is that they said something about the Cushite woman that Moses had married. And God hears this, becomes angry, and punishes Miriam with tzara'at, which is called leprosy. It's not exactly leprosy, but... And so Aaron and Miriam plead with Moses, and Moses then prays to God, El na rafana la, God, please heal her. And God responds, okay, I will heal her, but she'll have to spend a week outside of camp, just like somebody who had leprosy. And then she comes back into camp, and they move on. So that's a great question. Yeah, it's not really about gossip, but you're right. It's a burning question that can't really be avoided, right? It is. We talk about this a lot. We should talk about it probably more. Why is it that, because it says Miriam and Aaron spoke about God, and then Miriam's the one who gets punished, and Aaron does not. We don't know. There is what you might call perhaps an apologetic interpretation, which is that the text says Va tidaber Miriam v'Aharon el Moshe. Tidaber is singular feminine. So, and she spoke, Miriam and Aaron, about Moses. So it's a grammatically unclear sentence. So perhaps the message in that sentence is that even though Miriam and Aaron were having a conversation together, it was really Miriam who was doing the offensive act of speaking this way about Moses. So that's one way that, at least that the commentators justify why it was Miriam and not Aaron. But other than that, we really just have the open question that it doesn't seem fair. Aaron also does get away with making the golden calf for the Israelites. Yes. So this text here, number 5, is actually an interpretation by the Chafetz Chaim, one of our sages from I forget how many hundreds of years ago, and what he does with this, which I think is really interesting. So I'm going to read text 5. Remember what Adonai our God did to Miriam on the way when you went out of Egypt. The Torah exhorted us hereby that we mention verbally always the great punishment, leprosy, that the blessed Adonai brought upon that tzedakate, the righteous woman, Miriam, the prophetess, who spoke only about her brother, whom she loved as her soul. She did not speak in denigration of him. He thinks she didn't speak in denigration of him, but only compared him to other prophets. Somebody already pointed out that there's a typo here. It's because this is the last text I put in, and I dictated it on my phone. All right, but only compared him to other prophets. And she did not speak so to his face to shame him, and not in public, but only to her brother Aaron privately. And he, Moses, was not offended by all this. But in spite of which, all her good deeds did not avail her, and she was punished with leprosy for this. How much more so will other people, the fools who are prolix in speaking great and awesome things against their friends, be severely punished for this? And the speaker of Lashon Hara, the evil tongue, also transgresses Vayikra, Leviticus 19:18, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself, whereby we have been commanded to be as solicitous for our friends' money as we are for our own, and to be solicitous of their honor, and to speak their praise as we are solicitous for our own honor. And if one speaks or receives Lashon Hara and Rechilut, that's the word we just spoke about, being light or walking around as a traitor and amongst your people, against his friend, though it be true, it is apparent that he does not love him at all. How much more so is he in violation of love your neighbor as yourself? I found this a fascinating and beautiful text. Any other thoughts? What do you all think of this? His words reflect the general rabbinic interpretation that creates this relationship between slander, which is what it's thought that Miriam and Aaron were doing against Moses, and the punishment of leprosy.
But to me, it's just another case in the Torah where the punishment does not fit the crime.
The punishment is perhaps too harsh for the crime?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, well, you might make an argument either way on that one. Moses was the leader of the people, and one of the things that we'll run across here is that it is the importance of a good name. And so if you slander a person, especially a person who's as important to the people as Moses, pretty serious crime.
But on the other hand, you look at all her good deeds, which on the scale of justice did nothing. So.
Yep. I guess that's part of the Chafetz Chaim's point. Yeah. Okay.
Because it says Moses was not offended. What if she said he had bad breath and he was not offended, and then she gets leprosy? That's not
right. Well, that is interesting that in the text of Numbers, Moses doesn't express any unhappiness with what's happened. He's just a looker-on, and then he pleads with God for Miriam to be healed.
On the other hand, no, it's an interesting point because sometimes hard and strict rules are to avoid having to litigate every little thing. That on balance, it doesn't matter, just don't do it. And then it gets out of hand and you have the fight over whether it was or wasn't good. And when you have a leader, and we already know the Jews were a hard to govern mob, even if it appeared. So the appearance of it being wrong or bad would itself make it justified for the punishment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think this teaching is interesting in that it points out what is part of the laws on gossip in Judaism, which is that no matter whether what you're saying about someone is true or not, and no matter whether you've offended them or whether you're doing so with malicious intent, it's still wrong. So Moses, whether the punishment fit the crime, Miriam did warrant some punishment. But the Chafetz Chaim is also pointing out that there is a difference, right? It does matter what your intent is, and so even more so do people who walk around doing this kind of thing with malicious intent deserve punishment.
What I'm liking is going beyond the case of Miriam, which was the start of this. It transitioned into love your neighbor as yourself. And if you won't cast aspersions upon yourself, why are you casting aspersions against the person who is your friend, the person you supposedly love? All that trash talk behind someone's back, okay, you're married and you sit at the bar or in their coffee clutch and you're talking all this trash about your spouse. Love your neighbor as yourself. Mm-hmm. That's where he was going with this. It's not just about treating someone nice, it's about speaking kindly of the other person.
Yeah, I think you're pointing out, Lisa, that this is a nice example of one of the sages using the commandment of love your neighbor as yourself to help us understand the nuances around this other commandment that we're observing. That, it matters how you're treating a person. Ken.
Yeah. So I was thinking, I'm going to try to be non-technical, but like thinking about the very first line, "Let there be light." There was light. There's there's a sense in linguistic theory that like your reality is made up by the words, your vocabulary, your lexicon, the words that you know and share. And that strikes me as being somewhat like this. Like you're creating a world where that reality that you're putting out there is indeed reified. And that feels like really fundamental to a lot of this. Whether or not it's true, you've put it out in the world, and you're shaping that space and that possibility space.
Yeah. Thank you. Kira's making it around.
It seems to me that it seems to say, or Chaim, that the teller of the tale is doing more harm to himself than actually the person that he's talking about. And wasn't that true for Miriam also, that she ended up being more hurt, and they specifically say, than Moses was?
Yeah. Thank you.
Just one simple point is Aaron, there wouldn't be gossip if nobody listened. So Aaron just being passive is no defense, like Elie Wiesel says. You're either doing good, but you have to be an ally to people who are having harm done to them. So Aaron is not an innocent bystander here, even if Miriam said the words.
Larry, that's really a great interpretation. It makes me think that it must be somewhere in the rabbinical commentaries that Aaron was the listener, right? If it says, "And she spoke," Miriam and Aaron, that you would think, I haven't seen it, but it should be, it must be, it
I'm
has
here
to be
to tell you
that Aaron was the listener, right? That both of them are committing a transgression. Great. Yeah. Okay, let's look at some of these texts. This is just an interesting one, number 6. One who curses a friend violates the commandment that says you shall not curse the deaf. Of course, you shall not curse the deaf is a commandment that's important for other reasons, and it has other primary reasons. But it's interesting that they took it also took a commandment regarding gossip also from this commandment. This is a nice teaching from the Talmud. Why are fingers pointed like pegs? If a man hears an unworthy thing, he shall plug his fingers into his ears. A member of the school of Rabbi Ishmael taught, why is the whole ear hard and the earlobe soft? So that if a man hears anything unworthy, he shall bend the ear lap into it. So again, just as Larry was saying, it goes to the act of listening to gossip is seen in Jewish tradition as being equally or almost equally as bad as saying it.
Sorry, Rabbi, could you say that again? I was plugging my ear.
Didn't Elmer, I can't hear you, I've got an earlobe in my ear. Number 8 really begins to somebody was already talking about this, I believe, that there's this kind of slippery slope that once you start being okay with talking about others, it just becomes part of what you do all the time. Again, this is another teaching of the Chafetz Chaim. When someone gets used to speaking Lashon Hara, the evil tongue, he rationalizes it to such an extent that he or she begins to view Lashon Hara as entirely permissible. I think that's really true. I think that's really very insightful. And perhaps, I'm sure we're all familiar with the extent to which Jewish tradition is just so strict about this, right? To the point of being completely unrealistic, right? You can't say anything about someone else. You're really not supposed to talk about someone else at all, even if it's positive. And to the point that even the Talmud recognizes it is said in the Talmud that almost everybody violates this commandment almost every day. But perhaps the reason for creating this bar that's so high is because of this danger that if you don't maybe feel badly about it every time you do it, or you don't register that it's something you shouldn't do, and strive not to, that it'll just become second nature and you'll become a gossip. Any other thoughts about that? These next few texts in this section are kind of go to what the effect is, what's the harm of gossip. So number 9, if you were to say of your rabbi that he does not have a good voice, I didn't choose this text, by the way, and if your cantor that he is not a scholar, you are a gossip. But if you were to say that your rabbi is no scholar and your cantor has no voice, you are a murderer. Isn't that a great one? It's bad either way, but it's recognizing the economic harm, the harm to someone's identity from certain things that you would say about someone. And then 10, this is just a nice simple one. There are 3 crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of kingship. And the crown of a good name, Shem Tov, the crown of a good name, is superior to them all. So just getting to one of the many places in Jewish tradition where the Shem Tov, the good name, the importance of the good name is emphasized. And number 11, Rav Yochanan, in the name of Rab Shimai ben Yochai, teaches that verbal ona'ah, or oppression, is a greater sin than monetary ona'ah, since monetary damages can be corrected through compensation, but damages incurred by inappropriate speech cannot. So it's even worse than something you might do to damage someone's property or take from them, because it can never be returned. So, of course, we think about the feather, the story of the pillow with the feathers, and all these teachings that try to illustrate the irreparability, if that's a word, of destroying the good name. Joel.
So psychologists and psychiatrists say that it's a good idea to talk out your feelings, that kind of thing. So if you have a problem, sorry. Psychologist, can you hear me?
Yep.
Could hear me before probably, but so psychologists and psychiatrists say you're supposed to talk about your feelings and things like that, and if you're having a problem with a person, you're supposed to talk it out. How do you do that if you're not allowed to talk about anybody if they're not there?
Great question. I think in the case of a therapeutic relationship, that's taken care of by the confidentiality of that relationship, right? That's the job of the therapist, is to absorb all of that and to not let it be damaging. But you bring up the fact that part of the ways that we help each other in friendship and even casual relationships is sometimes by processing things that we've experienced or that we are experiencing by talking about them. And I think that's a big part of the reason why the Talmud recognizes that everyone's going to violate these rules all the time, because to a certain extent, you wouldn't want to have a society where there was no talking about other people. So I think that I think Jewish tradition is really trying to toe a line here of teaching how important it is to try to avoid it when we can and to be aware of it and aware of its effects, while being also recognizing that it's part of speech, and speech is so important and is part of humanity. Ken.
Branch of theoretical linguistics known as pragmatics, which deals entirely with the context of communication. That feels like a lot covering this bit. Like there's a context for when you're speaking to a psychiatrist or psychologist that is different than when you're saying the exact same things in a slightly different context. it feels like reading a lot of these, it's around, there's something there about that. Saying it to Moses' face versus talking about it behind his back is a different context and has different ramifications, implications, etc.
So I wonder if this might be a good moment to pause for a moment and think about how all of this is different now than it was hundreds or thousands of years ago. Of course, we think of the internet, right? Social media, but also just media, right? Before there was Facebook, there was just so much more dissemination of information now, I believe, than there was long ago. So what do you think, what additional factors do we need to be aware of now in an age of everything that we have? Misinformation. Yeah, absolutely, right? How many of us just assume that what we read in Wikipedia is correct? Hopefully Wikipedia is pretty good, right? But yes, certainly we learned about that in the context of elections and disinformation that has such dire consequences in those ways. But even in relationships.
But, I like that. It's what came to my mind, too, that what is sort of I felt like some of the harm that was anticipated in that ancient time when information moved so slowly is, now the problem, which is the same, but it's magnified the speech, the ability to say it much broader, that is developing, and the lack of civility around it that demonizes the other. And I don't have the one-for-one connection, but it feels related. At least the negative impact in larger society of what is being the impact of this type of activity.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot easier to demonize a person if you are talking about them sitting at your computer than it is if you're dealing with them face to face.
Sorry, so a brief story, because I used to do this stuff on the internet, but somebody who actually worked for Al Gore early on was writing an article about how the internet was going to bring world peace. Because you get to talk with all these people all over the world. You get to meet them. And I got a footnote in this article because I said, it's easier to say, I hate you to somebody remotely than it is face to face. I think that's right.
Mm-hmm.
The other issue, though, is breadth. Because before you were talking person to person. Now you're talking person to millions of people. So where it may have been private before, there's no privacy anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Right. In a sense, this is like the tongue, right? There are some good effects from this, that your speech can reach so much farther. So, in the ways that our speech is helpful and good, it's also amplified. But in the same way, harmful speech is so much more so.
It's a little bit of a conundrum, I think of, because, Judaism also calls us and to speak out about injustice, and unfortunately, a lot of that has to do with leaders, and speaking out against the leaders, who are human beings, and so it's kind of. How do you kind of reconcile that? I don't know. I get, it's not speaking ill, but that there's ill to be spoken about that's dangerous to our society often.
Absolutely.
I'm going to answer. I think the answer to that one is the intent. If it's for the good of society that you're speaking out, that's very different than malicious, he's not your candidate, so I'm just going to lie about him because I want the other guy. So, but the other thing I was going to say is where it says damages incurred by inappropriate speech cannot be corrected through compensation. I was reminded of some Yom Kippurs ago when we had a session on forgiveness and the lengths to which we are supposed to go to ensure that we are forgiven and that the apology is truly accepted. And it made me think that I guess they didn't have libel suits when this was written, but there is monetary compensation for libel, and of course, in a libel suit, again, it's the intent. You have to show malicious intent.
Yeah.
If it's just negligent accident, oops, I didn't realize I was wrong, you don't probably win a libel suit.
Yeah, incidentally, I don't know if we're going to get there because we're having such rich discussion, but one of the later texts does say that when you're rebuking someone, because that's one of the sections here too, you should rebuke them, continue rebuking them until they hit you. So it's kind of similar to this forgiveness. You have to ask 3 times, right? You should keep doing it until you're not getting anywhere at all. Yeah.
So it seems to me that the question about when you should speak out or shouldn't or talk about somebody is encapsulated in number 4, which was from the Torah, that you shouldn't be. There are things you cannot do, right? You shall not go up and down as a talebearer. Neither shall you stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. So that could be interpreted as, matters of justice. You must speak out.
That there's a tension between those two,
right,
those two needs.
Where the line is, that's the challenge.
That's right, right, and that's great. That's perfect, and that's ethics, right? Is measuring those two imperatives.
Since we're invoking past High Holy Day sermons, this is your quiz. Do you remember Rabbi Schwartzman's sermon from, 2 years ago when she spoke about ethics and speech? And
I think it was more than that.
There were, maybe it was a few years, 3 things. Is it true? Is it kind? And is it necessary?
Yes, Rabbi Israel Salanter.
Good job.
Salanter. Yeah. Rabbi Stein?
For the rabbi.
No, I was just thinking about the piece about speaking out against somebody, and I think sometimes it gets very blurry because I was looking at the rebuke section where the Rambam number 2 gives a recommendation that you were telling us about, that you should try to tell somebody again and again if they did something wrong until they really reject you. And I think what's interesting about that is that some modern scholars would say, well, this reifies power imbalances when we say this. When you say you should always approach someone privately and you should just keep trying privately, that if somebody has more power than you, they can say, I'm not going to listen. And I feel like that's why we have a culture now that's embracing sort of speak out publicly if someone did something wrong to you. But at the same time, I think that borders on shaming people sometimes. And it's actually a hard decision to make sometimes. What's the actual line here? So I don't know, I was just wondering about that as we were talking. I don't know that it's so clear-cut always, and how do you make the choice when it's not so clear-cut?
Yeah, that's great. I actually took out, because I just felt like there was so much in here, and I'm not sure where it was, but there is an interpretation, it was in one of the Torah texts, that said that when you're rebuking someone, it has to be in private. But except in the case, that's for sins that you're rebuking somebody for that are between person and to person. But in sins against God, in a sin of the spiritual, you go right to the public condemnation. So that speaks to what they prioritized in that time, right? But I think it gets very much to your point. That there are certain things that you have to set aside the need for privacy and speak out about.
Decision about the appropriateness of them. It's to your point, it's such a fine line, and
right.
You do it publicly, and it seems almost random as to whether or not the community is going to say, get behind, oh yes, that was the right thing to do, or no, we're going to, functionally excommunicate you from, whatever
Agreed.
It's a weird reality now.
Yeah, agreed.
The only thing I wanted to say is to your question is how applicable is this today to then because of the change in the way we can communicate? And the answer is it's more necessary than ever to do what we're doing tonight. Yeah. Consider these things because the consequences are so dire when you I'm not using the word transgress like sin, but when you go beyond the boundaries of what is fair or that balance between not letting the blood, but on the other hand, not speaking ill of somebody, it's very hard. And
yeah.
So all the technology makes it even more important that this should be part of every sixth grader's curriculum before they are given a iPhone.
Yeah. We've talked about the scope of where the speech goes and how many people hear about it. There's also the fact that many times whatever you've said on the internet doesn't go away. And so if you Google somebody, something that they did or that somebody said about them years and years ago, it might be the first thing that comes up.
So, and this is really complicated. Because this made me think of is it personal versus policy? If it's just general even when you're on different sides of a political question, and regardless of your station in power, by the way, you can make your cases. But when it becomes very personal, then it's a personal attack, and then it's ruining the good name. And taking that debate public because of perceived power differences doesn't seem to be an appropriate, because it made me think of the idea of peace in the community, and which is also a separate thing. And so if you've got a beef with somebody that you've been gossiped about, isn't still, even in our environment, the best thing to do is to try, at any rate, resolve that privately or in a peaceful way?
But just to push back on the other side there, I think that's very true. But the Me Too whole phenomenon was an example of where it's involving policy, but it's also involving relationships and private relationships, and the hush hush nature of it is a major part of what kept that unknown to so many people for so long. And so part of the importance of putting a dent in the sexism that existed in every industry was being public about it.
Well, I just don't know that is what we're talking about. I agree with you, but I don't know that is part of it.
Not sure that's what we're talking about. Well, okay.
That's action as opposed to gossip. From what I understand.
Well, we're skipping a bit ahead to the rebuking section, and there is an emphasis in the rebuking section that Rabbi Stein was pointing out, that it's desired to do your rebuke in private and not do it publicly. And so that was the issue, that sometimes there's a need, which I think is more recognized today, to rebuke publicly, because otherwise you won't have the same effect. Steve?
Yeah, well, like the Constitution, you're still dealing with very few words to deal with a myriad of situations, and so you have to interpret. And I'm thinking, for instance, of giving testimony in court. How do you balance that against speaking publicly against somebody? How do you balance the need to bring an employee along to be a better employee rather than have to fire him because you can't speak to him and dress him down or, even in a kindly way help him see the error of his ways? So we can't expect it to cover every possible situation.
Right. And rebuking is an important part of speech that's lifted up by Jewish tradition. Absolutely. I think there's some interesting text for us to read on truth. So I do want to get to that. Lisa, do you want to take the last comment on this section?
what we've done is gone all into politics and all into where we are in public spaces. But for me, the more important part is how we handle our private spaces. If we can learn to take in these ideas in our private relationships, this will eventually echo into how we are in the public sphere. So instead of sitting here and wondering, well, how about this and how about that and what do I do about that candidate or the, what is it I really hate? Entertainment Tonight, is that it? Which is all about, oh, they're doing this and look at what she wore. But if we concentrate on how we are with the people in our circle, I think that's what the heart of what Jeff is giving us with these comments. I think this is where we can make the difference in our lives.
Great, Lisa. That's great. Thank you. So let's look at the section on truth. We have this, this first text just to kind of set up, it's like this, the straw man, perhaps, the straw man text. Rabbi Hanina said, the seal of the Blessed Holy One is emet, truth. So we have that, right? But then we have some interesting teachings to look at about, when is it not all about truth? So some of you may have heard this text from the Talmud. Our rabbis taught, how does one dance before the bride? Beit Shammai say, so Shammai and Hillel are the two great Talmudic or Mishnaic scholars, and they always disagreed with each other on everything. And Shammai always had a more strict interpretation. Hillel was always more forgiving or gentler, and Hillel's ruling always won. Shammai say, the bride is as she is. And Beit Hillel say, beautiful and graceful bride. Shammai said, it says Beit Shammai, this is the school of Shammai, all of the disciples of Shammai, to Beit Hillel. If she were lame or blind, would one say of her beautiful? This is definitely ancient text here. So we should read into this all of the new ways that we would understand how one thinks about beauty. If she were very unattractive, would one say of her beautiful and graceful bride? Whereas the Torah said, keep far from a false matter. Said Beit Hillel to Beit Shammai, according to your words, if someone has made a bad purchase in the market, should you praise it to the purchaser or depreciate it? Surely one should praise it to the purchaser. Therefore, the sages said, one's disposition should always be pleasant with people. So, it's a great debate, really, about a very simple thing, right? Do you say something is nice and wonderful, especially in a moment of a beautiful bride? It gets to more. We could also come up with examples where it's not quite so cut and dry, right? Even the purchase example. Your loved one comes home with something they bought. Isn't this great? How much did you spend on that? Right, well, wait, before I answer, is it returnable? But let's think about that for a minute. What are the situations where, white lies, when are they good and when are they not? That's right. When I went to Russia to visit a friend when I was young, one of the first phrases I memorized from the phrase book was "Очень вкусно," very tasty. Cantor leader.
Yeah, the Musar tradition really emphasizes the idea of shalom bayit, of peace in the home, over truth even. And that there is a place to either not say anything or a little white lie. They don't call it that, but it is certainly permissible.
Right. More thoughts on this one? Carol?
I was thinking about it particularly for the graceful and beautiful bride. I mean, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, and what I
That's
think
right.
is beautiful may not be what
That's right.
somebody else
Yeah, well, I
thinks
mean,
is
we have to be
beautiful.
honest that this is a very problematic
Yeah.
text, right? We should.
And I think, you can always show appreciation for what someone has done,
Yeah.
whether you particularly like, to use your example, the purchase or not. How thoughtful of you to have bought
Right.
it, or
Yeah.
some other positive statement. I can't say I always perform it that way, but.
Take a moment to disagree with what you just said.
Go right ahead.
I promised not you. I promised you I'd do this before.
Yes, you did.
Yes. I understand this, that there are moments in life where it's going to be beautiful because it is beautiful in the moment. Every wedding, at the time and in that moment, putting the shotgun weddings aside, but is a beautiful moment, and everybody is beautiful. I think
right.
that's what it tells us. That there, in some ways, times and place, but that there are some things that it is not subjective. There's an objective truth, Emmett, to certain rituals, and that it takes character to stick with that.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right, Sam. And I think for that reason, I probably shouldn't have brought this text. I should have found a different example, because I think that what they're trying to get at through this text is what's important here, which is, in what situations should we tell the truth even when it's not the thing that a person wants to hear? You get a gift. Oh, I always wanted this. Or no, I don't already have this. Or do you be more honest? And situations where it's more consequential whether somebody hears the truth or not. So this is another example of when truth is not necessarily what's needed. Okay, so this is about Aaron. Again, Aaron always gets a good rap. That's why I named one of my sons Aaron. Two people, and this, by the way, this is part of why Aaron is called Rodef Shalom, pursuer of peace. Two people had quarreled with one another. Aaron went and sat with one of them. Aaron said to him, "My son, look what your friend has done. His heart is so distraught. He has torn his clothes out of sorrow regarding the quarrel, and he is saying, 'Woe is me! How will I raise up my head and look at my friend? I am embarrassed in his presence because I am the one who wronged him.' And Aaron sat with him until he removed the jealousy from his heart. Then Aaron went and sat with the other party and said to him, 'My son, see what your friend has done. His heart is distraught. He has torn his clothes and he is saying, Woe is me! How will I raise up my head and look at my friend? I am embarrassed in his presence because I am the one who wronged him.' And Aaron sat with him until he removed the jealousy from his heart. And when the two disputants met, they embraced and kissed one another." It doesn't work. Patricia says it doesn't work. I don't think it would work between my twin boys either. Yeah. Right. But, I mean, this is an exaggerated example, right? But do we do that sometimes? Do we accentuate how much we think one party in a dispute might understand the other's point of view, or might be hoping for resolution? Do we try to bend the truth to make peace? I definitely do. I know I do in my family once in a while. And I do really enjoy this next text, if we can move on to that one. It's in the story of Jacob and Esau. Usually, this is the scene of, we don't necessarily need to read this text, actually. But this is the scene of Jacob coming in with cooked game to steal his father's blessing, when Esau should be the one to get the blessing of the birthright, right? So Jacob deceives his father into thinking that it's Esau that has come and provided the meal and is ready for the blessing, when it is actually Jacob. And Esau gives him the blessing, and when Jacob leaves, Esau then comes and realizes that both of them realize that the blessing has been stolen. And, I talk about this text all the time. You know, I think a lot of us do, and it always seems to be in the context of, you know, Jacob is the hero of the people, right? The father of the people of Israel. But look at what a liar he was, and you know, what a thief he was, and you know, noticing the flaws that we tolerate in Jacob. I don't think we often talk about the sense of this that I think perhaps was more felt in the times of the when the story was written. That, you know, Jacob was supposed to get the birthright, in a sense, right? God said to Rebekah that the older would serve the younger. So Jacob was supposed to be the one to inherit the covenant. And when Rebekah sent him to steal the blessing, there is a possibility for an interpretation that he was only doing what he needed to do to make God's will happen, if we place ourselves in the context of the story. And so I think it's interesting to ask, you know, when do we feel that lying is okay to get maybe the desired result, or even what we think is the right result? Larry.
So, without being political, one of my major concerns about a recent candidate was the idea that there's an alternate truth. That truth is, and actually as you look at these things, there are ways that people can rationalize around, even in our tradition, what is clearly true.
Right.
Like the bride is homely. But you don't say that, and at that moment she is beautiful. She is. But, so it's very problematic. And this is a big problem.
Yeah. Mm. Let's, you know what, the political question of this is important and interesting, but let's also remember to talk about it in a more interrelational and personal context.
Well, one of the things you had mentioned what Rabbi Amy talked about with regard to, is it kind, is it true, is it necessary? Seems like all these issues we're dealing with, it depends on how much weight you give to each of those. Mm-hmm. And who gives the weight. Different people would give different weights to truth, kindness, necessity.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna offer up two examples of where I see this happen. One really more personal and one slightly less. One is I'm close with a family in which it's part of their pattern to lie to each other in order for their own good. Right? You don't tell dad when this happens because he'll become too upset and too angry. You don't tell mom when this happens because the same thing will happen. You know, we don't want the result of this dispute, so we're just going to steer away from it. I'm not saying that's the right thing or the wrong thing, but it's something that maybe happens in life. Another example, again, I don't know whether we condone it or not. There are many doctors who are very ethical and honest people who will routinely, I believe, maybe there might be doctors in the room who are going to really, you know, get me for this, will write codes because that's the way you get the insurance coverage, right? And they do that because that's the way the system is set up. And everybody knows that the insurance companies want to cover this thing, but you have to have it coded a certain way. If you don't have it coded that way, it's going to get denied, and you're going to have to appeal. And it's just something, nobody wants to deal with that, right? So that's what I look at it. You know, when is it okay to not tell the truth in order to, when do the ends actually justify the means?
It's okay to do it to help someone save face, particularly children. You never embarrass or humiliate a child, and it goes back to the rebuking. Take them in the other room and softly tell them what they need to fix. But helping someone save face is so important.
Just two quick things, and I agree with that last point. You know, there are new techniques we've learned, and it just made me think of the yes-anding, right? Well, I think there are times in the course of human events where the moment is so important, but so how do you make it happen? You can almost go back to the moment with Jacob, and I hadn't thought about the interpretation that everybody knew it had to happen this way, so how do you do that? Perhaps graciously in saving face in the process. But the other is the technique, which has made me reminded me of, and I've done a lot of this, is in improv. Rather than saying no and challenging, and you accept all information given, that way you honor what was said or done, and you redirect the moment. And it's just a technique. We haven't gotten into that, but it's part of gossip or other things. Rather than saying no or challenging or fighting about something, that you learn how to acknowledge what's happened and take action to make it right.
Great, thank you. Jennifer, did you have your hand raised?
Long-time listener, first-time caller?
I was just going to say, maybe Jacob doesn't lie in this story. Maybe what he does is he honors his mother, which is a commandment. And his mother has heard from God that Jacob is to be the leader. And so what Jacob does is honor his mother. Maybe it's really about perspective.
Beautiful. Well, just incidentally, there are really amusing interpretations of this story by the sages. Rashi, when Jacob is lying, Rashi twists and turns to pretend like Jacob actually is not lying. So when Isaac says, "Who is that who's coming to approach me?" Jacob says, "It is I, Esau, your firstborn." Well, Rashi says that the commas are different actually, or the periods, that Jacob is just saying, "It is I. By the way, Esau is your firstborn." Because there's no verb to be in Hebrew, so it actually could happen that way. So you're not far away from the rabbinic interpretations that perhaps Jacob did not really lie. Maybe one or two more comments. Joel.
I was going to say that your question and two examples, I think, is a slippery slope for two reasons. One, if you say something in order to get what's right, then there's a question of integrity. That's one. Number two, how do you know what you think is right is right? And so you're saying something to what you think is right, what not is right. And that's a slippery slope for those.
Yeah.
Two more. At least.
Just hold it close. Actually, it's not working.
When you said something about the doctor, the first thing I thought of is when doctors refuse or are afraid, I think, to tell people that they're dying.
When doctors don't tell people bad medical news. I'm just translating for the people who are listening. Yeah.
To me, that's immoral, but
Interesting. Yes, really great point. Yeah. Are we giving Lisa the last word?
I always have the last word.
I can live with that. I'm happy with that.
Okay. Make it a lot easier. I talk to my siblings every week. We have a standing Zoom session. And it always devolves into stories from childhood or stories about other people in the family. And I'll listen to someone telling a story, and I may remember it differently, but I have learned, what's the point? The punchline will be the same, and everybody likes the punchline. It doesn't matter who was in the room at the time, and if it was lunch or it's dinner. And I've noticed that Dale, my beloved, and I he'll start telling a story about something in our past, and I know he's completely wrong. But it's okay. I mean, what's the point? The bottom line is that people get to hear a wonderful story. It's his interpretation, it's not my memory, but it's a great story. So no harm, no foul. And it took me a long time to reach
Absolutely.
this
I
point.
am in the same place as you, Lisa. My wife, Jamie, and if she would say it herself if she were here, is a writer and doesn't have the same value of a story that she's telling being exactly true. And so I have had to step back and allow her to spin the, what's it called? Spin the thread, or yes, spin the yarn. Yes. Thank you, everyone. This was a lot of fun. There are more texts on Rebuke, but we did actually hit on some of them. So I invite you to take them home and check them out. You can just come use it.
So I just want to let you know that we have drinks and cookies right out here. But if you're going to have something, please take it outside onto the terrace so that we're keeping with temple COVID policy. And don't forget, next week, Cantor Rhodes is going to talk about the oys and joys of raising children. Well, I think we need to teach her something too, right? All right. Thank you all for coming tonight.